Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hello again. So, as David said, we've got an interesting discussion ahead. I think we've heard from several speakers today about the level of development and infrastructure that's going to happen and is happening in Vietnam at the moment. And we've got four very good panelists who I believe most of you probably know to speak about the issues, the risks, the opportunities that the industry is facing. So I will let them introduce themselves, starting at the far end with Mr. Wyatt.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Quick introduction. So my name is Stephen White. I'm the country head of JLL in Vietnam. I've been here for 8 years, almost to the day. I think it's 16th of June was my first landing in Vietnam. So I landed and straight off the plane from Africa. I was in Africa before here, and almost the moment I landed, the market crashed, which was a nice entrance into real estate in Vietnam. Yeah, so country head of Vietnam, we built the business over the last 11 years. JLL's been in Vietnam for 11 years. We carry all the sort of service lines that you would expect of a international consultancy. We have nearly close to 350 people within the business, and it's growing quite rapidly, and probably by the end of this year we'll be up to close to 500 people. And Vietnam is a very exciting market, but also lots of challenges, which I'm sure we will discuss within the panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Martin Ho. I'm from Vingroup. My background is actually a consultant. I came to Vietnam in 2002, and I worked for Page Kirkland. Now it's Autos Page Kirkland. It was a cost consulting and project management company until 2014. Then Vingroup approached me because of my MBA in management consulting. So I came to Vingroup in 2014 and started doing a lot of internal work in changing the corporate want to change, the restructuring, changing procedure, changing strategy, the way they work, not only on the construction market, but not only on the construction company, but also on the others, supposedly like the owner of those projects, like Vinhome, Vincom Retails, and others as well. So now I'm the commercial director of Vincom Construction Company, one of the subsidiaries of Vingroup.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Piro, Chief Operating Officer of Indochina Capital. I've been in Vietnam for just over 12 years. Started off my career in Vietnam in Da Nang in 2006. Started on the sales floor. Working for CBRE. Indochina Capital was my first client. I guess I did a pretty good job. They offered me a job. I've been with Indochina now for 10 years, where I kind of started on the sales floor, worked my way through development, and then through investment. And today, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the Chief Operating Officer, where I cover all areas of our business, which today include a real estate development platform where we have a partner with Kajima from Japan. We have a stake in a major co-working business here in Vietnam called Tong. We have created our own brand for a hotel management company, a new Vietnam-focused millennial-type brand. Yeah, those are the three kind of key pillars that we're doing under real estate. And then we also have an advisory division, which makes it quite relevant to my training and membership here at the RICS. So happy to share the bits and pieces I've learned over the years with you guys here today.
Good afternoon. David Blackhall is my name. We're all giving a bit of a background on how we sort of got here, I think, so I'll tell you what happened to me. I'm from Sydney originally, and I was working in the asset management real estate business with Deutsche Bank there, and I decided I wanted to take a holiday, so I quit and I went to Hanoi in 2005, and I'm still here. The holiday hasn't...
A long holiday.
Yeah, I had a wonderful job with a family Hanoian property developer, which was a very good experience coming from Deutsche Bank to a little family business up in Hanoi. And we were building apartment buildings a couple of floors higher than what we should have and doing various other things. But in those days, that's what we all did. Times are changing now. And I came down to Saigon in 2007 and I started working with Vina Capital. We originally had an extremely large real estate team of probably 75 or 80 people. We were managing probably close to $1 billion in real estate at one stage, and Vinaland, the London-listed fund that I look after, had 46 investments. Now, for those of you that know Vietnam, having to manage a portfolio of 46 investments is certainly quite some feat, and as time went on, I realised that I stopped bragging about having 46 investments and kept quiet about that because it was actually something that was particularly stressful, especially during the downturn. Exactly. When we arrived here, we came the same time. In fact, we met in Da Nang, I think, in 06, and we both had lovely, long, dark hair. Anyway, so Vina Capital is where I still am. I've been there for a little bit over 10 years now. We've shrunken our real estate capability down to a very core team. We do development, we do strategy, we do investment. We do a lot of transactional work, mainly in the residential development area. We've done a lot of refurbishment of hotels and things in the past. We've looked at other areas, how we could make money here with foreign investment. We've done JVs with some American private equity groups in Ho Chi Minh City. We've set up a hospitality platform with Warburg Pincus about 18 months ago. That's a separate company, but a sister company of ours that does hospitality investments. And the rest of our business is all around sort of now really focusing less on listed companies and funds and more on JVs and smaller private type structures that have a real estate bent. And that's what I do. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Trying to hold it like this, it's a bit easier. So we've got a series of questions to ask the panel. We'll start off. We've obviously heard a lot today about the major national infrastructure projects in Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh City Metro line being one of them. How do these projects impact on the real estate markets, and what do you see the advantages and disadvantages of these projects being? David, we'll start with you.
Okay, we had a couple of very good sessions before lunch on infrastructure, and I think a lot of the challenges came to the surface on how it's not an easy sector to invest in. So when we look around and we see what's going on in the market, the real estate market has been very strong for the last 3 years and continues to be so, even though a lot of us, I think, a year ago thought it was slowing down. We peaked, it's topped out. That doesn't really seem to be the case. So it's good times, and I think it's relatively stable as well. So I think looking forward, the next 12 to 24 months, even beyond that, is going to be very good times for local and also foreign investment in the real estate sector. However, those that are living here in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, probably less so Da Nang, will have noticed things like traffic has got significantly worse, congestion on the roads, airport congestion. Airports are so busy, there's new airlines, there's so many more people flying. Transport systems, hotels are full. It's wonderful from an economic perspective, but from a real estate perspective, it does create challenges. And for those of us that are looking at buying land, investing, developing, you need to be very smart about where you're going to be buying that land, because I think more and more end users, owners, occupiers, clients of these buildings, wherever they might be, will think twice about the location due to travel times and difficulty in getting around. Infrastructure is not just transport, it's power, reticulation, it's water sewerage, it's fresh water, mobile telephone networks. It can be a whole range of things, and Vietnam is coming under a lot of stress now due to the fact that the infrastructure development is not keeping up with the real estate market. So it will put the brakes on and the anchors on people like ourselves who are investing and developing real estate in this country. We've seen the metro line sort of under construction. We had a very good presentation this morning on that, but you know, he didn't seem to sort of use the word delay. I didn't hear that word delay come into the conversation, but these, you know, construction projects are significantly behind where they were supposed to be, and due to the significant delays, the cost blowout is really enormous as well, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that they have with the metro line system. It does need to be built, it needs to be built quickly. I think he mentioned this morning $25 billion is the cost of building these lines. You know, I would think that's extremely conservative, and the amount of work that has to be done in tunnelling in a city like Ho Chi Minh City, which is effectively silty, you know, waterlogged sort of ground, it's extremely expensive and very slow to build. So there's some enormous challenges. You look at the airport, the new airport's been delayed. They've now looked at extending and building a new terminal on the existing airport in Ho Chi Minh. You know, it's barely coping now. So Vietnam, while is enjoying an extremely prosperous economic boom, if you like, is going to be I think it's going to be restricted in this development going forward if infrastructure is not appropriately addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about like some of the disadvantages, when we're looking at infrastructure, purely from an investment standpoint, just based on my own experience that I would share with you guys, is really important to kind of get if you're doing an infrastructure play, if your investment thesis is based on improving infrastructure, just be very careful, because as David mentioned, there are significant delays. I've burnt twice now, by banking on certain infrastructure projects going in, and then subsequently having the delays. Even when we built in 1-year delay, 18-month delays, the delays went on beyond that, and the whole investment thesis fell apart. You know, as an example, in Hanoi, we built a $150 million mixed-use project, about 144,000 square meters, office, retail, apartments, in Hanoi, right on a SkyTrain line. Right on a metro line. At the time, this metro line was supposed to be completed well in advance of us completing the building. So not only did it not get done, but while we were opening and trying to lease it up, you know, the station that they were building in front, they were pouring concrete. There was a complete bottleneck in front of our building, and so the infrastructure didn't work for us in this case. I actually lost tenants. Rents went down during that period. It was harder to sell units, and so what was supposed to be a home run ended up being egg in my face. So I would just caution you, like, when you're looking at planning your investments around the infrastructure is obviously going to add value, but just make sure you get the timing right. So that would be my advice for any of you out there that are acting as investment managers, looking at deals and planning your deals around future infrastructure. Expect delays.
I'd just like to add a few points as well. Yeah, sure. It's a great thing when you actually have you know, the infrastructure development go around your site. The values always go up. But as everyone said, there's so much delay, especially infrastructure in this country had to be built by government, and there's not that much of privatized. So there's always expected delay. It's not just the paperwork, it's the financing. You know, you can't actually get the project running if you don't actually pay the contractors, and in order to get paid, you have to go through so many levels of approval and paperwork. So it's always slower, it's always delayed compared to the original timeline. So there's always things to consider. It's also the disruption as well. But I also want you guys to look at the point of view of the people, the end user who actually going to inherit those property that you developed. You know, someone mentioned before the whole suffering of projects delay. You know, as a resident, they start to get a lot of big traffic congestion. They got hassle, they got noise, they got dust, they got everything. So it can be a good development, and people also wait and tolerate to wait until the property values are going up. But for how long? So that's something really you guys have to consider as well.
I think just to add to the comments that have been raised so far, what we did from JLL's point of view, for the first metro line in Ho Chi Minh, we did a bit of market research just to really understand sort of land values and the amount of development that's happened since the announcement of the metro line until today. And we've seen, I think, I'm trying to remember that it's something like 77,000 units, residential units, have been built or launched along Metro Line 1 since the start of construction, or from the date that it was actually launched. So I suppose I'm in agree with all the point, you know, that the projects can be delayed, but the importance of infrastructure in Vietnam is huge. I mean, it cannot be underestimated how important the infrastructure component is. And the fact that, you know, developers obviously follow the metro lines, and, you know, that's very evident by the amount of development that we've seen in just on metro line 1. But then you have the added complications of added, you know, additional land values, and then, you know, you get a lot of speculation and sort of investment that goes with it as well. So, but what it also does is connects new parts of the city, and so we're starting to see additional sort of districts and provinces within the city now becoming a lot closer to the city, which ultimately is good, and I think will help with connectivity. My last point on the metro line subject is one metro line is not going to make any difference to the city whatsoever. So I'm not sure what was announced this morning, but, you know, ultimately there will be 6 lines, but we're looking at a 10, 15 or 20-year time scale when this metro line is going to, you know, the full network is going to be completed. So my belief is that people will ultimately still go to work on a motorbike, as opposed to driving to a metro line station, then going out on metro line, and then having to walk or get another, you know, motorbike to the office. So, you know, the thought that one metro line is going to make any difference, I think, is a bit of a misnomer.
Thank you. I like it. It's good. It's given us some food for thought, which is what we want. So just moving on, we've heard about the impact, shall we say, of local investment in development and foreign development, or foreign investment in development in Vietnam. What's the competition been like between the local and the overseas investors and developers? Has there been much fallout or many issues? Martin, do you want to start with that?
I mean, we will discuss this morning a lot as well, but obviously with the foreign investor or the local investor, both have certain strengths and weaknesses. Compared to the local investor, I mean, as the foreigner, I would say you've got more strength in capital, in professionalism, in standard, in know-how. But then you got stuck a lot on the paperwork, on the routine, on the procedures. As a local investor, a lot of them got more benefit in terms of the further reach into the local market, better connection with the authority, easier to get paperwork done or clear the land or get the project started compared to a lot of foreigners. You know, they got a really good project, but they can't get it on the ground for so long time. So I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, I'd add from a foreign developer's perspective, I think, you know, it's been really interesting to watch the kind of dynamic change over the last 10 years. To go from, you know, what we were doing before, we were considered a relatively large developer, and now Vincom in one project builds more than we built in the whole 20 years we've been here. So the dynamic has shifted considerably, and it should not be ignored. Actually, when we put together our strategy for Indochina Kajima, the whole development thesis was kind of based on urban infill, so smaller sites in core locations. And the reason we did this is because I realized right from the first day, before we got started, I will never be able to outbid FLC on a big site. I'm not going to be able to outbid Novaland. I'm not going to be able to outbid Vincom. So all the bigger stuff, I let them have it. I won't even try to go after it because they will win every time. You know, you see Capital Land and some of the other Singaporeans, they find their way through M&A to get some of these bigger sites. It's all through partnerships. Personally, I don't like doing joint ventures. So we decide on a strategy where we focus on urban infill, so smaller sites that are too small for Vincom, FLC, and Novaland, too big for a small private investor, and right in between. So, and that's proven to be very successful for us. You know, we got up and running about a year and a half ago. We got about 5 sites under contract right now, which is pretty good in a tight market like this with a lot of a lot of activity, a lot of foreign interest, a lot of buyers out there. So I think definitely local developers are and will continue to dominate the market. If you're a foreign developer, if you're not delivering quality, good luck, because they'll always be able to beat you on cost. And so the only way you're going to compete is by positioning yourself as higher quality, international product, and appealing to that segment of the market, which isn't huge, but there is a healthy segment of the market that goes out and looks for those higher quality, higher price products that are engineered for more of an international lifestyle. So I think that's the only way we can compete in this market with local developers.
You've taken the words right out of my mouth, Michael. We have adopted an almost identical strategy to what Indochina's doing. Vinca Capital has moved away from the very large 150, 200, 500 hectare sort of sites which require relocation of people and site clearance and master plans and things like that. They're very long-term projects and ultimately can be very profitable, but you run the risk of being caught in a downturn in the cycle. Whereas if you do smaller, shorter term, get in, get out, 3-year or 4-year max, it's a much lower risk, it's lower capital, and a much more profitable outcome. And if you can source and find those sorts of sites, and it doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about resi, it could be boutique hotels, it could be even office buildings, you could reposition things you can do that are lower risk and faster turnaround. There's a lot more money to be made and they're much more profitable and much lower risk, and therefore you lose a lot less hair.
Interesting you mentioned that, because Capital Land start buying a lot of our buildings at the moment. Part of the projects, as one of their strategy as well, to basically go in and buy part of the projects, whether they're going to build themselves or sometimes we actually build it for them as well.
Exactly, because they're learning their lesson. I think that's the biggest trend. A lot of reporters that I talked to recently, they're asking about the contrast between M&A and kind of FDI, or direct foreign investment. And I think it's pretty clear now that in the first cycle, second cycle, however you want to call it, over the last decade or so, the foreign investors have touched the fire. They've been burnt enough. They're like, enough. I don't want to try to do approvals. I don't want to try to do relocation. I would rather enter the market like Capital Land by buying a building that Vincom has already gotten approved, has already cleared, will probably even build the structure. It's much less risk and much easier to go in the deal and come out of the deal, rather than trying to do a project on your own, come in without a partner, try to get land either from the government or from a private seller, go through the approval process. Because all it takes is one little hiccup in the approval process. You lose 1 year, your IRR is gone, and you have no chance of recovery. And you're going to build the project so other people can enjoy nice houses, but you're not going to make any money. So I think it's much smarter now. What you're seeing now is there's much more M&A activity going on now, where foreign investors are saying, I'm not getting involved in that. The local guy, you can make a lift on it. I'm happy to see you make a little bit of profit, mark up the land a bit, but de-risk it for me. And even, we don't do any joint ventures. We buy all our land direct. But even for us now, we're putting the obligation on the vendors to do the approvals. I'll say, here's what I need to build on this. When you get this approval, I will pay you the rest of the money, and I'm happy to pay you a lot of money, top market, no problem, more than anyone else, but take the risk out of it for me. You are local, you can do this part, you're good at it, I'm good at building it, let me do that, and through that relationship, the market's becoming more efficient. So I think what you're seeing now, this M&A, where there's specialization, where foreign developers are focusing on what they're good at, local developers are focusing on what they're good at, and together the whole process is moving faster. I think that's a win-win for everyone. So I'd encourage everyone in the room, if you're involved in these type of situations, to look for good M&A partners. Don't pick projects, pick partners. pick the right people, because it doesn't matter how great a project is if you guys end up in conflict or dispute. So really focus on picking good projects and good partners, and I think that's probably the best way to go for those of you that are working for foreign developers.
Stephen, anything to add?
I think that's it. I mean, to sum up, I suppose it's still pretty much it's a two-tier market. You've got the foreign groups and the local groups. Local groups are always going to be able to transact quicker. Their DD process is much less onerous than a foreign group, and they have the market knowledge, which is key, and it's obviously in local language. So it's a two-tier market. All the deals that we do from a capital market sort of investment point of view is now exactly what Michael said. It's a foreign group, bringing them in, finding a good quality local partner, and forming a new JV. So the market has evolved and has sort of matured to some extent. So as Michael mentioned, I think there's a lot of groups that got burnt last time around, and so the experience has filtered through, and we're not seeing crazy sort of investments that we saw maybe in the last cycle. So I think ultimately I think it's a good thing. The biggest frustration in the market is good quality product, is actually finding good quality opportunities that foreign investors feel comfortable with.
Just to add to that and twist it a little bit, but as someone that's done a lot of selling of land in the last 3 years, probably more than $300 million worth over say 12 or 14 projects everywhere, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, and Da Nang and Nha Trang. We've been actively trying to sell these projects, but probably 90% of what we've sold has been sold to Vietnamese investors. We've spoken to all the capital lands and the Keppel lands and, you name it. They've all been into the office to have a look and see and kick the tires and come back with their list of needs and requirements and things. But ultimately, it's the Vietnamese investors and developers who, they have the local knowledge and they have the confidence to say, well, I can take that piece of land. You haven't got the land use right, or you haven't got this sort of approval, we will get that. Not only that, they're thinking, well, we can double the gross floor area and we can improve your master plan and we can triple the value within three or 6 months, and that's great. And they're very gung-ho, and their due diligence is 2 weeks, not 2 years, and there's no CPs instead of a Singapore investor that wants 25 things done. So just from a seller's perspective, the Vietnamese are very confident and very active and very strong in acquiring project sites. And what makes it even better as a seller is that they're under pressure because the foreigners are running along behind them. And there's a real competition in that market now to acquire land and sites. And 3 years ago, the Vietnamese knew, well, you know what, we're not in any hurry, there's no one else looking at it, it's too big for the foreign groups or whatever it might be. That's now changed, and they're under pressure, and if they don't want it, there may well be a foreign group that will come in and buy it. So it's an extremely healthy market, but the Vietnamese, from our perspective, are by far the biggest player and the biggest mover and shaker in this business.
Okay, thank you very much. Stephen, starting with you on this next one, are there any asset classes within the Vietnamese real estate market that you think are about to sort of grow rapidly, take off in a big way?
I think the easy answer and the cop-out answer is, to be honest, all sectors. And the reason that I say that is because we're still in a, if you look at the bigger picture, if you look at Vietnam and where we are today, still very much an emerging market. So all sectors still have very strong growth potential over the medium to long term. I'm talking 10, 20, 30 years. Without any question, you look at every sector, pretty much all undersupplied. Take residential may be a slight exception. There's been a lot of activity in that sector over the last 3 or 4 years in particular. But fundamentally, when you look at the numbers versus population versus other Southeast Asian countries, all sectors way undersupplied. Office market, Ho Chi Minh, 2 million square meters, Bangkok's 9 million square meters. that just puts into perspective where we are in the cycle, where Vietnam sits within, from a property market perspective. It's just, and it applies pretty much across the board in all sectors, whether it's hotels, whether it's retail. Retail's slightly different, and I think we're going to see e-commerce play a big part of the retail story going forward, and therefore we might not see so much retail shopping center development happen that we've seen in more mature markets, and e-commerce is going to sort of play a part in that. But the sectors for us, so office sector, certainly Ho Chi Minh and even Hanoi now has caught up very dramatically over the last 2 or 3 years. Industrial market, very, very strong, getting a lot of interest, a lot of free trade agreements being signed off, big shift in movement from China, low-cost manufacturing from China. So industrial, very in vogue at the moment, and logistics is going to play a big part in that story. And it's almost every sector that you look at across the board, there's a strong growth story.
Yeah, I think just to single two out specifically, my two favorites are hospitality, obviously. I'm biased. I mean, we build a lot of hotels. I love hotels. But if you just look at the fundamentals, international arrivals, I think we're up 30%. Domestic tourism's up 20, 25%. The numbers just keep growing and growing. We have more source markets coming in with new flights opening up. So I think, and not just the international story, but domestic tourism with over 60 million domestic tourists. I think that's an amazing story there. As low-cost travel comes down, this upwardly mobile, emerging middle class, they're spending money, they're moving around, they're flying, it's accessible for them. So tourism, medium term, long term, I'm still very bullish. And then kind of playing off of what Stephen was mentioning about the role of e-commerce, I think that I'm looking very closely at logistics as well. I think e-commerce here is already big. I think it's bigger than what any of the numbers that you see being published suggest. I think all of us can sit in our office and watch our staff run up and down, up and down. There's a guy on the motorbike, a red bag, handing them something that they ordered. And that, but they probably ordered it from Facebook or something else, so those sales aren't being registered yet. But the actual online sales in Vietnam are enormous. And a lot of it's cash transactions, cash on delivery, so it's not being recorded. But the market is there, the strength of that market is there, and it's going to require significant logistics to keep it going. As more fast food comes and more need for cold storage, et cetera, et cetera. So specialized storage facilities, cold storage, et cetera, those are things that we're looking at, kind of inner city logistics hubs. I think huge potential there playing off of the online sales. So those are kind of two kind of niche markets that we're looking at very, very carefully.
To simplify things, I'll tell you what I don't like, retail. I think retail's too hard, actually, for a number of reasons. The e-commerce thing and, very few groups have got the retail right here. There's a couple, but there's been a lot that have struggled. So I would not touch retail. I like logistics, warehousing, distribution, facilities. That's definitely a big growth sector. It has to be, and it's a very safe, good sector to be investing in. Long-term yields and long-term leases with big tenants. It's easy compared to some of the other ones. Office, I like residential, but I would say landed property, housing, villas, townhouses, smaller, affordable type ones, but stay away from the high-rise. Leave that to your big Vietnamese developers. So most things are pretty good, except retail.
It's interesting when you guys mention that because we aim to do almost all of it. I can't say much, but we're going to spend about $500 million in our Aderoy, which is our e-commerce sector, in the next 2 years. So that's going to be quite a big investment for us in the next few years as well. We already start moving into industrial with our VinFast. Initially, it was just to build our own factory, but we got so many approaches. Now we actually start building the industrial park as well to lease out. So that's definitely a new market for us to get into. Um, Hotel resources, I mean, we've been doing a lot of resources, but in the last couple of years and in the next 2 years as well, we start to do a lot of high-rise hotel, condo hotel, sharing. I mean, at the moment, everything is about sharing from Airbnb to Uber to anything else. So people love that idea. So condo hotel become quite popular in the last few years. We already done 3, and we're doing a 4th one next month. So that's actually quite a big difference for us, changing from that as well. Obviously, we still have our high-end Vin Homes product, but in the next 3 years, we're going to spend a lot of time and effort doing our medium sector, which is a Vin City. We'll probably build 125 towers in the next year and a half.
Houses or towers?
Towers. It's actually quite a big shift in different markets as well. It's a slow few years for us.
Okay, so Vin Group's going into industrial and warehousing, then Mike, you have to drop that and pick up something else.
By chance only.
Really clean logistics. Really cold storage.
I think the 3 other themes that we're looking at the moment, which we quite like, there's healthcare, education, which we classify under JLL as alternatives, but we're seeing a lot of activity in both those sectors at the moment, which, again, these guys are in, so maybe we won't touch. And then, I mean, the other play for us is that we see, to David's point about retail, there's a lot of retail podiums that are not performing. So under mixed-use developments where retail podium has been put in, generally poor design, poor layout, tenant mix not great, upper levels are not performing, maybe ground floor's doing okay. But we see a lot of repositioning possibilities there, and this is where maybe some of the big co-working groups will come in and take the...
It's like with our ownership in Tong, we're a fairly significant shareholder in Tong, and the calls that come in every day from struggling retailers that are trying to fill that top floor, it's crazy. Every day there's someone calling in, and which I think is pretty consistent with what you're seeing shopping malls evolve into. Like for the actual consumer purchases, it's online's taking off, and shopping malls are becoming entertainment plazas. It's like you're seeing slowly the waiting. And when I first came to Vietnam, the waiting of fashion, the weighting of non-F&B or entertainment-related uses in a mall were much higher. They're getting shrunken down, and everything is becoming F&B. So malls are becoming places where people go to hang out, not necessarily. If you look around most of these shopping malls, try to count how many people are actually carrying a shopping bag. Not many. They're there for air conditioning, they're there to eat, they're there to let their kids play in the ballroom and watch a movie, but they're not shopping as much as they should be. And from my opinion, not just being an observer, but being on the landlord side as well. Footfall doesn't always translate into strong sales here.
Okay, thank you. Lots of interesting viewpoints, but there is a clear pattern in e-commerce. Seems to be at the top of the agenda. Okay, moving on. I know we sort of touched on a lot of these points already, but starting with you, Michael, what are the challenges that foreign developers investing in Vietnam face, in addition to what we've already talked about?
How much time do we have?
Not long enough.
No, I think I think some of the challenges here. Obviously the approval process is highly bureaucratic, and as a foreign investor trying to navigate your way through that project, even very Vietnamese foreigners like me and my partner, Peter Ryder, who's been here for 26 years, I've been here for 12 years, to work your way through that process is extremely difficult. And it hasn't, that's one of the things in Vietnam, in my opinion, that hasn't gotten any easier.
Unless you're Vin Group. Right?
Yeah, unless you're Vin Group. It hasn't gotten any easier for
We
us.
have like 100 people on that department, so obviously.
It's a completely, and then other issues, I think if you look at the rules in relation to residential sales, Foreigners are allowed to collect less money up front than a Vietnamese developer, so that's completely unfair, in my opinion. Especially, and the idea was that you know, there's a risk that someone might run away from the project. Let's count all the projects that have been run away from and see how many of them were from local developers and how many were from foreign developers. And so it is confusing for me that why there's restrictions, why foreign developers are allowed to collect less money during pre-sales. So there are some actual structural disadvantages built into the system beyond just the day-to-day challenges of being a foreign developer in a local market. So I think you just gotta, we all gotta kind of navigate our way through those issues, and I think over time we start to learn the right methods to get things done efficiently and the right strategies. But it was a very kind of, to know what we know today, it was a very expensive tuition. There were a lot of mistakes made along the way, a lot of painful lessons, but we sit here today humbled by the challenges we've faced, and you know, our eyes are wide open now. So I think as you get into the market and you approach these challenges, I think my advice would be, you know, the highs are kind of never as good as they seem, the lows are never as bad as they seem, and you just got to try to stay balanced and stay focused and stay calm through it, because there, you know, every day here, there's something that comes up. There is always issues, and if you're not a solutions person and you cannot solve problems, you have no chance of being able to do development here in Vietnam as a foreigner. So I think you need to be adaptable, resilient, flexible, and you know, whether the challenges relate to approvals, whether the challenges relate to the market, whether the challenges relate to the banks now restricting funding you know, restricting funding to real estate, whether it's a challenge of getting your money out of the country, remittances can prove to be very difficult. There's a ton of problems, but I think it's more about how do we mentally prepare ourselves for what we know is coming, and staying focused, staying calm, and staying flexible through the process. And you know, hopefully, you know, there'll be some gold at the end of the rainbow for you.
I was just going to ask, do you think it's got easier over the last 10 years?
I think I've just gotten more tolerant and more understanding. I don't think it's gotten easier. I just think I have, like, oh yeah, we're going to be delayed 3 months. Oh, okay. What's happening? Well, the guy went on a vacation. He doesn't want to sign the document. Well, you know, I think we've just become more understanding of it. And then, you know, I'm not going to tell you all my secrets, but we do have secrets, and we do have ways of getting things done around here. So we have developed pretty effective tactics for making things happen. So it does get better with time. It gets a little bit better, but the process is still inherently difficult.
I think, yeah, time, like doing time here, it's knowledge. And so each year you've learned a couple more things, maybe not the easiest possible way. So once you've been doing things here long enough, you kind of never make the same mistake twice, or most people don't. So I think one, you know, experience, knowing how to avoid kind of potential issues, working around it, planning ahead. But there's probably still the same three fundamental risks today as what there was 10 or 15 years ago who is a developer, and that is, first one is site clearance. You know, you should not be buying a piece of land where people are living on it. You know, do not entertain the idea of doing your compensation site clearance. It's going to delay the project significantly. The second one is licenses. Now, you know, we used to buy land that kind of had no licenses, and then we got everything, which can take an enormous amount of time and a lot more money than what you think it would. And the third risk is your local partner. If you can understand, control, and manage those three risks, you will be a very successful developer investor in this country. If you only have two of the three, you might be okay and survive, but they're the three fundamental sort of issues that you need to get a handle on from day one.
With local banks, commercially, obviously, it's been a different story, as David mentioned. I guess it was 2010, probably 2010. You know, I had outstanding loans of just under $100 million at 22%. It wasn't very fun. And so basically, you're working for the bank at that point. But I mean, you know, you learn from those times. So I think just getting your financing right, don't lever up too much. If you can access pre-sale capital to reduce your short-term lending, highly recommended. And yeah, just overall, you know, getting it right. And David's point about money in and out, you know, cash trap can kill your IRR. Like, you know, you haven't realized, if you're a foreign investor, you haven't realized your IRR until it's really been put back in the people's hands that have given it to you. And if it's stuck in Vietnam, even if the project is done, it doesn't matter. And that's a real issue. It's happened to us quite a few times where, you know, money gets stuck in the country. So really getting your strategy right from the beginning as money's coming in is really critical.
Our model kind of the same. On average, we're spending about 50,000 billion a year on construction, just basically paying the contractors, 250 mil. Yeah, $250 million. Is that, am I right? Too many now? 2.5 billion?
On construction, you guys would be spending way more than 250 million.
A year. A year. We average about 50 to 60 projects a year, and that's the money I have to spend every year as commercial directors. So obviously, you know, you think every day about moving money around, thinking about interest rate every single day. But yeah, our model is kind of the same. You use about 25 to 30% of your own equity, another third from the bank, and another third basically from the sales. But through the year, I mean, we have our reputation, so the sales is always very, very good. We always get the money up front. We also get a very good interest rate from the bank via the whole idea of instead of getting a commercial loan, we actually get the buyer to borrow the mortgage, and we pay the interest for them. So you would paying about 7% instead of 20 or 15. So that's another model as well. Obviously, you only can do that. You actually firstly, have a really good relationship with the bank throughout the whole credit line, how many years. Secondly, they got to look at your liquidity of your apartment as well, because not everyone can go in and borrow it, as you say. You know, not everyone have a credit line if they buy the first home. But with our partner, then if you buy from Vinhomes, take a bank for example. You buy from Vinhome, that's it. They take any time, because if you can't pay your loan, Techcombank can take your apartment and sell it like in second like that.
So are all your loans non-recourse, just project loans, or does Vincom ever put up like a corporate guarantee from the parent on any of the loans?
We do. We do. We have to. Anyway.
That's how you can get better.
Yeah. But obviously we have our own ecosystem. It's not just our Vinhomes, but we have 26 other companies, and we have, you know, a good relationship with the bank, and we basically just move money around, so that helps a lot as well.
Can I ask you a question about your 10-year rental guarantee sort of structures on the sale of villas and things, like 10%, was it 10% or 9%? 10% for 10 years. Yep. How does that actually work? Because it sounds too good to be true.
It sounds too good to be true, but if you look at our Vinpearl, for example, I mean, we don't actually put it out in any kind of property. It's purely on our high-end villa, beach villas. But we have a whole ecosystem. We have 9 Vinpearl at the moment. Well, we're just about to open our 12th one. So our Vinpearl working really, really well. Our average occupancy is about 85%. Not many hotels can actually say that. We're not targeting the expat, we're not targeting the business traveler, we're targeting the Vietnamese family. That's why all our resorts always have, you know, a theme park, a zoo, or something. We're targeting those local market, and we're doing really, really well. And that's how we can actually timeshare those villas and guarantee such, because we know we can actually get it out. We not only have our sales doing really, really well. We also have our website, our Aderoy, to basically sell all of those vouchers. We have 46,000 employees at the moment, which in the off-peak season, now you're going to take your holiday, go and fill up those hotels, that kind of stuff. So we have our system, and it works for us in the last 5 years.
And you guys are probably like one of the few groups that probably will, in the end, make it work for the whole 10 years. Because I think your costs are going to be lower. You guys do have a good balance sheet. you are getting the revenue side coming in. You're not paying a hotel manager, so your margins are going to be higher. So you probably can pull it off. But I guess I am concerned about the other like 999 projects that aren't Vincom, where they're guaranteeing, small one-off developers guaranteeing 10% for 10 years, and they have no balance sheet, no track record, no credibility, and people are just being like, starstruck, sticker shock by like 10% for 10 years, 10% for 10 years, and they're buying it, but I'm not sure it's all computing and they're computing the risk properly. Because I promise you there will be some losers out of these condo-tel projects with these 10% returns. Because I know what a hotel can generate organically. I've owned and run enough of them to know that you can't get those returns naturally. So you better have a pile of money sitting somewhere in reserve to be paying out all these people. In Vincom's case, you probably do have that pile of money sitting there to pay people out if the
We do.
organic returns aren't getting there. But for other people, I mean, be careful if you're out buying those type of products. Study the developer. Make sure you understand the depth of their financial wherewithal to really get comfort that, that 10% being guaranteed is actually going to be paid out.
You should buy everything through Michael, is what he's getting at.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone. Just to sum up, some of the sort of key takeaways, really. Infrastructure, it's a great enabler, but be wary, expect delays, and factor them into your feasibility studies. Even if you factored in 2 years, it may not be enough. Real estate growth, everything's growing, but keep an eye on e-commerce, and in particular logistics and the enabling assets. That was the pattern that was emerging in the discussion. If you're a foreign developer, be flexible, be adaptable, be patient, and perhaps most importantly, find the right local partner to help you jump through the various bureaucratic hoops. And finally, by the sound of it, when it comes to finance, make sure you've got a really good relationship with the local banks, and make sure you're structuring your overseas money and how it comes onshore in the right way. So that pretty much sums up everything. I don't know how much time we have. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Okay. Anybody have any questions for the panel?
Hello everyone, I'm from Vina QS company, QS consultant. So thank you for the sharing, and my question is a bit general. Like we share a lot of a market in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, even Da Nang, which is the most central cities. So I want to know your opinions about how the other areas, just like Hải Phòng, or the south in Vietnam, like Cần Thơ, or Dong Nai and Bình Dương, is it optimized or potential market for the infrastructure and real estate developed also?
I'll take a first crack at this because I have a little bit of experience visiting these secondary markets for our hotel business that we created. It is a brand for the local market. Our plan is to open about 25 hotels throughout Vietnam, so that people could have a affordable luxury kind of one-stop shop throughout the country. So that has prompted me to start looking at markets like Hai Phong, like Canta, like Hue, like Quy Nhon. So we've been studying these markets, and I think they all have, a lot of them have good potential. Particularly Hai Phong is like at the top of my list. If you look at well, I don't want any looking at the hospitality performance there. Wait till I buy my site and build my hotel first. But the hotel performance in Hai Phong is actually, extremely robust, extremely robust. There's an enormous industry there. The service department market is very strong. So that's a market that we're looking at very carefully. I studied Hue and some of these other markets, but actually on the surface, I thought it was a good story, but when I went in and studied the markets, they're actually still pretty weak. I think a lot of those you need to take a long-term view or do something really kind of economic. Like I know Vincom has a strategy to go into those, a lot of those markets, do cheap and cheerful, big box kind of retail, you know, of really affordable housing and stuff. But overall, like, I think you got to pick those markets carefully. I think the ones that have a strong economic driver, like Haiphong has the ports, like Van Dam is going to have a new airport and casino. So I think when you're looking at secondary markets, what is the stimulus there? Like, what is the stimulus that makes that market attractive? And then really dig in deep to understand the market performance and then make your decision from there. But, you know, Da Nang was a secondary market when we started building there 12 years ago. You know, no one thought anything of Da Nang, and look at it today. So I think there are major gains to be had by going in early, but be patient and study the market carefully and study what is really going to drive the demand long term, not just because the land is cheap, because my friend works for the government there and he offered me this site. That's not a good enough reason. Get in, do your homework, and make sure you pick the right site.
I'll just to add to that, I think, you know, you mentioned Dom Nai. I think Dom Nai province, it already is on the move, very much so. One, they will eventually one day build that second airport, but also just the urban sprawl coming out of Ho Chi Minh City and the industrial opportunities there, warehousing and distribution type things. So Dom Nai, I think, is certainly a province that has already begun to sort of really gain momentum, and it will continue to do so. Da Nang, you know, we sort of, Vina Capital went into Da Nang the same time as Indochina, and I know when I first went there and I thought, geez, there's kind of nothing here. That was 2007, but yeah, you look at it now and it's a completely different situation. To the point where, you know, Da Nang, you kind of say now it's pretty much had its day. Where do you go next? You know, to give you another coastal region, I think Quy Nhon is a zone, a region that hasn't kind of got there yet, and therefore acquisition costs are still relatively low. So you would look for places, ideally coastal. Everyone likes coast, water type environments. And if you can buy at the right price and you have a vision, go for it.
Just one more thing on tourism, access. Study the market, but study the flights. Always study the flights first, is how can people get there? Because, you know, as an example, we built the most amazing resort on Condau Island, right? You know, Brad Pitt goes there all the time, Angelina Jolie, they love it. You know, there's been tons of celebrities. Really amazing. Lots of people want to go there, but no one can get there because the flights are always full. And half the time we had to, when we owned it, we had to cancel the bookings because of the flight. So everything was great, it all lined up, but access wasn't ready yet, and that hurt us. If you look in Da Nang, same thing. We underwrote the flight together with Vina Capital. We underwrote the flight. We gave money to Cathay Pacific to introduce a Dragonair direct flight from Hong Kong to Da Nang. They did not believe us that they could fill up that flight. Today, it's one of their most popular flights that they fly anywhere, and it's almost impossible to get on a flight from Da Nang to Hong Kong because it's booked out in advance. So I think infrastructure, going back to infrastructure and flights, access becomes a really critical consideration when you're looking at new destinations to invest in.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
My name is Sia Kui Yong from Singapore. Well, I do not represent such a big developers group, so I actually represent the smaller SMBs where there are actually Vietnamese agents who went to Singapore to market for the small urban renewal, small hotels. So of course today we didn't seem to cover this area. Of course with the transport development, Line 1 coming up, all this District 1 has been urban redeveloped. So are you all interested in it, or are you leaving into the small fish to do this area?
When you say redevelopment, do you mean like brownfield, like taking an existing building and refitting it out, or do you mean just urban infill? Like, what do you?
I mean, for example, I'm still new in Ho Chi Minh. I'm just experiencing Ho Chi Minh for less than 7 days of understanding, and I see all the District 1 building has been converted into mini hotels, which has a mini lot with from 4-story rebuilt to a 6-story building and so on?
They weren't converted into that. They were built like that. They were built like that those are purpose-built hotels on those lots. Um, and so I think, you know, that's actually a standard form of development here. And that's actually really interesting because 85% of the hotel supply in Vietnam is small 2- and 3-star mom and pop operations, right? So that represents an enormous part of the market, those hotels you're describing. And really our strategy, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on a new hotel brand, is to aggregate that demand in, you know, you have 7 poorly run hotels on one street. I'm going to put 1 really well-run hotel on the same street at roughly the same price, but much better quality, better economies of scale because I have more rooms. And so, you know, I'm really competing with those hotels you're seeing. I'm aggregating that demand and putting it in a branded product. So very similar. I imagine your strategy is quite similar to what you guys would like to do in Vietnam.
I think that's, I mean, we like the 3-star, 3 to 4-star sort of type area ourselves. You know, it's not that expensive to develop and build, say 3 or 3.5, 4-star, and you have a return on your capital reasonably quickly, as opposed to say a 5-star, which is kind of a much more difficult kind of an animal. So, and they are very successful, these small type hotels, and you're right, there's hundreds of them around the centre of Saigon, and they mostly do pretty well, pretty good business. And you look at all these package groups that are coming in there, tour groups, and you know, they're wealthy sort of customers and clients. I know my mother was one of them. She came over with, you know, 40 friends from Sydney, and they went on a, you know, 21-day trip around Vietnam, and they didn't stay in any, you know, 5-star hotels. They were all in all these inner city, you know, $45, $50 a night sort of hotel rooms, and loved it. So I think it's a good model.
I'm looking at it from the foreign investment point of view, because as we were invited by the Vietnamese housing agent, whoever come in marketing, we realized that as a foreigner, we can't actually buy over that piece of land unless we JV with them. And then even if we buy purely as a foreigner, we are only restricted to 50 years of ownership. So we were surprised as to how to arrange for a buying of such land, and generally it's not discussed.
I think you got to get comfortable with the 50 years. Everything that we're doing is on 50 years. If you can't get comfortable with that basic premise, then it might not be the right situation for you. But if you're finding good sites and the only issue is that you have to acquire it individually and hold it on a 50-year lease, then that's actually a good situation for you if you can find those type of deals. You know, we've encountered deals that are down to 30 years, 25 years. We're a little bit, usually let it pass unless we can get comfortable on a renewal. But if you can find relatively clean deals with a fresh 50 years, you're doing pretty good. And so, yeah, I think that's just fundamental to the market that you got to get comfortable with.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all we've got time for. Oh, one quick question.
First of all, thank you very much for your insightfulness in the real estate market, especially Michael. You share a lot, and I think we learn a lot. But for the most part, majority of the people that are in Vietnam looking at the real estate market can see that that there is potentially a bubble that's currently happening. There's a rapid rise in terms of residential apartments, and you know, Vin Group is a big part of that. So my question is, do you think that is a bubble, and do you have you know, an expectation of when that will pop, or if it's going to burst? What is your opinion on that?
Yes and no, because obviously in any economy, not only in Vietnam, the real estate market or the economy itself always have a certain cycle. You know, between 10 to 12 years, you always see a little dip, but depend on the economy, depend on the environment, whether that dip is a lot or just a little bit and then keep going up again, that's a different matter. We all expect that a few years back, but obviously you see the development, you see the GDP You see the tourism, you see the market opening up. I don't think it's going to be a big bust in the next few years at all. There's a lot of competition. A certain segment will have a certain adjustment, I would say, but not in the whole market because we're doing a lot. We're still doing a lot. At the moment, we're only doing about 20% of our assets in terms of lanes. So there's still a lot coming up. I mean, we're building the Vin City, that's the height 125, and that's only 3 projects out of 60. We're doing average about 50 to 60 projects a year, so we're still very optimistic about the market. I don't think it's a big thing at all.
Yeah, I would say, like, as Martin's mentioning, every market naturally is cyclical, right? There's going to be ups and downs. We know that. What we don't know is when, and we don't know how high it's going to go up or how far it's going to go down, right? My sense right now, having been here from 2006 and having lived through, having been baptized in fire when I first came and went through like the worst market conditions ever, like David walked into, and I'm sure some of us, others up here, went through it. This doesn't feel like that. That time, well, that was a true bubble. It was characterized by completely irrational behavior. The buyers were not being prudent. Everyone was being greedy. Everyone was seeing dollar signs. You walk behind someone's desk in your office and they're either watching the stock market or looking at a real estate website. Even the tea ladies trading, everyone's buying. Taxi drivers are waiting in line to put down deposits. That was a totally different situation. That was like, you could see it. You're like, the music's going to stop, the music's going to stop, the music's going to stop, and then boom, it stopped, and it went down, and it went down hard. This is not that. If there is a bit of a correction, or if there is a bit of a cycle, it's going to be a soft landing or a much softer landing. Yeah, we're seeing things start to slow down on the residential side. But it's not crazy. I mean, we have a small brokerage division. We still have enormous orders from Korea, from Hong Kong that we can't even place because there's not enough of the right product. So I think in the kind of higher end segments where, your higher end stuff is still doing extremely well. I mean, we've sold, hundreds of units in Golden River, and we could sell more if we had more right now. So there is still demand out there. I think this law of allowing the 30% for foreigners has had a major impact on keeping the market up, because if you look at a lot of the top projects, they're hitting these quotas. They're hitting the 30% quotas, and they're maxing out. So that's meaningful. That's a meaningful amount of inventory that's being absorbed by foreign buyers, and it's an important part of the inventory as well, because if you look at it, your profit is tied up in that last 20 or 30% of a project, right? So if you do really well out of the gates and you sell 70%, but you're sitting on all those bad units and you didn't phase it out properly and you got all the dogs left, that's all your profit sitting in those units. So getting that extra 30% of wind coming in from the foreign buyers is having a meaningful impact on the market and on the higher end projects. So I actually feel pretty good about the strength of the market right now. It seems to be being held up by fundamentals. Nothing is looking too far out of whack to me. So yeah, will it soften up for sure? But I don't think we're looking at a bubble right now.